There is a silent enemy that lives within you. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't rest, and it arrives precisely when you are most vulnerable. It does not shout, it does not strike with swords or fire. Instead, it works in silence, a whisper that grows louder until it consumes your very sense of self. This enemy is made not of flesh, not of iron, but of your own thoughts, and if you fail to master them, they will master you. Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human soul, warned that hell is not a fiery pit beneath the earth, but a storm raging inside the mind. And indeed, when you look across history, humanity has always sensed this storm. The ancient Greeks spoke of daimons, spirits that whispered temptations and doubts into the ears of mortals. In medieval Europe, monks believed that the demon of acedia crept into the hearts of the faithful during long afternoons, filling them with despair and lethargy. And in traditional Chinese medicine, overwhelming negative thoughts were likened to an imbalance of energies, eating away at the body and spirit alike. Imagine for a moment that every negative thought is a seed. At first, it seems harmless. But if left unattended, that seed germinates. It spreads roots deep into your soul, and soon your inner garden, once fertile with love, peace, and creativity, becomes overgrown with weeds of fear, guilt, and doubt. You wake up one morning and realize you no longer live in a sanctuary, but in a jungle of thorns. Have you ever been sitting in silence, doing nothing, when suddenly your mind begins to replay every failure, every mistake, every cruel word that told you that you weren't enough? Have you felt that suffocating weight even when everything on the outside seems fine? That is the untrained mind at work. That is the shadow Jung spoke of, the unseen double of ourselves that grows stronger the longer we refuse to face it. And here lies the paradox. Our culture often tells us, just think positive, smile, and the storm will pass. But Jung knew the mind was too intricate, too ancient, to be soothed by such shallow advice. He would not ask you to deny your thoughts. Instead, he would invite you to face them, to meet the shadow eye to eye, to watch each thought as it rises, not to embrace it blindly, but also not to give it the throne. Because what you deny gains power over you, but what you accept, you begin to transform. Your mind, then, is not the enemy. It is a tool. But if you surrender the reins, if you allow it to dictate the rhythm of your soul, you become a prisoner within your own house. Throughout history, countless individuals have fallen into this prison. The philosopher Seneca wrote that men suffer not only from the things that happen, but from the imagination of what may happen. Centuries later, Jung echoed the same truth. The real battlefield is not out there in the world. It is within. So the question is not whether the storm will come. It always does. The question is, when it arrives, will you be swept away, or will you learn to stand in its eye, calm and unshaken? Every thought that passes through your mind carries a kind of potential. Some are seeds of joy, creativity, or love. Others, dark, heavy, and corrosive, are seeds of despair. Left unchecked, these darker seeds take root in the soil of your soul. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they expand until they shape the entire landscape of your inner world. Think about it. A single thought, "I'm not good enough," seems harmless at first, but repeated often enough, it digs deep roots. Then another comes, "I'll never succeed." Another, "I don't deserve love." Before long, the garden inside you, once fertile ground for peace, has become a wilderness of self-doubt. That's how a mind untrained, a shadow unacknowledged, begins to dominate. Carl Jung warned of this process. He saw the shadow not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as an inevitable part of being human. The shadow contains what we repress, our fears, our guilt, our rage, our shame. Left ignored, these hidden fragments rise through our thoughts, distorting reality. And if you never learn to tend your mental garden, you become its prisoner. Have you noticed how a memory of failure lingers far longer than a memory of success? Or how a single insult can echo louder than 100 words of praise? This is no accident. The human brain is wired to remember pain more vividly than pleasure. Our ancestors survived by anticipating danger. A rustle in the grass might be the wind, or it might be a predator. Those who erred on the side of fear lived longer. But in the modern world, this wiring often backfires. We become haunted by shadows that no longer protect us, but poison us. Other traditions recognize this centuries before Jung. In Buddhism, there is the concept of the monkey mind, a restless, chattering presence that leaps from thought to thought, refusing to be still. Left untrained, the monkey mind can torment a person endlessly, keeping them trapped in cycles of craving, fear, and sorrow. In Stoic philosophy, the teaching was blunt. We cannot control events, only our judgments of them. To mistake our judgments for reality, the Stoics said, is the root of suffering. The common thread is striking. Whether in East or West, ancient or modern, humanity has always understood that the mind is both soil and seed. If you feed it well, it produces fruit. If you neglect it, weeds flourish. And the cruelest truth is that many people, perhaps most, accept these weeds as normal. They adapt to living in a wilderness of negativity because it is the only landscape they have ever known. But here's what Jung understood, and what so many miss. You are not the jungle. You are the gardener. The storm of negative thoughts may rage, but you are not the storm. You are the sky that holds it. The seeds will fall, some bright, some dark, but you alone decide which are nurtured and which are left to wither. Carl Jung did not believe in chasing away negative thoughts with cheerful slogans. He knew the human mind was too deep, too ancient, too layered for such easy cures. To him, the idea of simply thinking positive was like telling a wounded soldier to ignore the blood. The wound demands attention. The shadow demands recognition. Jung's wisdom was this: the parts of yourself you refuse to face do not disappear. They simply move underground, and from there they wield their power in secret. The rage you deny becomes bitterness. The fear you bury reemerges as anxiety. The guilt you silence takes shape as an inner critic that punishes you endlessly. What you refuse to acknowledge ends up controlling you. So he invited people to turn toward their darkness, to look at it clearly, and to strip it of its hidden strength. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. This is not easy work. History shows us that even the strongest minds wrestled with their shadows. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and philosopher, filled his meditations with reminders to himself not to be consumed by anger, not to give in to despair. His words were private confessions, written not for glory, but as a shield against his own inner storms. Centuries later, Teresa of Avila, a mystic nun of Spain, described nights when she felt utterly abandoned by God, moments of emptiness, of terror, of shadow. And yet, she wrote, those very nights became doorways to deeper understanding. She faced the darkness not to banish it, but to walk through it. The same struggle unfolds in every era. Soldiers on battlefields, saints in cloisters, artists in their lonely studios, all eventually confront that voice inside that says, "You are not enough. You are unworthy. You will fail." Some collapse under its weight. Others, like Jung, discover that the only path forward was through it. When you face your shadow, you may tremble. You may resist. But paradoxically, it is in this confrontation that freedom begins, because the shadow is not only a storehouse of fear. It also contains the raw material of your greatest strength. Jung saw that our creativity, our passion, even our capacity for love, often lie entangled in those very parts of ourselves we are most ashamed of. So the task is not to destroy the shadow, but to integrate it, to look at it and say, "Yes, I see you. You are part of me, but you are not the master of me." In that moment, the monster shrinks, the chains loosen, and what once seemed like a curse begins to reveal itself as a hidden gift. Most people believe their thoughts are entirely their own, but Jung taught otherwise. He showed us that many of the voices echoing in our minds do not belong to us at all. They are fragments of other people's fears, judgments, and wounds, passed down like an unwanted inheritance. Think back to your earliest memories of being scolded, dismissed, or ridiculed. Perhaps a parent told you, "You'll never be good enough." Perhaps a teacher laughed at you before your classmates. Perhaps a partner whispered words of cruelty in a moment of anger. At the time, they seemed like passing moments, but those words did not vanish. They sank into the soil of your mind. Over years, they hardened into roots, and now you hear them as if they were your own thoughts. This is the tragedy of inherited voices. They disguise themselves as truth. You repeat them so often that they become indistinguishable from your identity. You no longer say, "My father told me I was worthless." You simply think, "I am worthless." The original wound is forgotten, but the scar speaks every day. Jung believed these patterns were not only personal, but collective. He called them archetypes, universal scripts humanity carries across generations. Cultures pass down their own shadows. A society that worships perfection teaches its children to loathe their flaws. A community shaped by war instills fear that lingers long after the fighting ends. Trauma is transmitted not just in stories, but in silence, in habits, in the very way love is withheld. Modern psychology confirms this truth. Studies on generational trauma show that children of survivors, whether of war, famine, or oppression, often carry heightened anxiety and fear, even without experiencing the original catastrophe themselves. Pain echoes through bloodlines, shaping the inner worlds of those who come after. And so, when you sit in the quiet of your mind and hear that cruel inner voice, ask yourself, whose voice is it really? The doubt that says, "You'll never succeed." The fear that whispers, "You don't deserve love." The shame that insists, "You're broken." These may not be your words at all. They may be the words of a wounded ancestor, an embittered parent, a culture that could not see your worth. The power lies in recognizing this. Because once you realize a thought is inherited, you can refuse to keep repeating it. You can choose to end the cycle. You can say, "This story was given to me, but it will not pass through me to the next generation." History gives us countless examples of people who broke these chains. The child of poverty who refused to be defined by it and built a new life. The daughter of oppression who fought for her voice and gave it to others. Each of them faced inherited voices, but they answered with their own. And so can you. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." These words cut to the heart of why so many people feel trapped in repeating patterns. The toxic relationships that feel eerily familiar, the failures that echo each other, the disappointments that circle back again and again, these are not accidents. They are shadows guiding your steps from behind the curtain. Think of it this way. If you carry within you an unexamined belief, "I don't deserve love," you will unconsciously seek out partners who confirm it. If you believe, "I will always fail," you will sabotage opportunities before they bloom. The story plays itself out again and again until you mistake it for destiny. But it is not destiny. It is programming. History itself reflects this truth. Look at the great dynasties of the past. The Roman Empire rose with discipline and fell with decadence, repeating the very mistakes of those it conquered. The Ming dynasty of China, brilliant and creative, collapsed under the same internal corruption that toppled so many empires before it. Even nations, like individuals, are trapped by unconscious patterns, repeating cycles until they are forced to face what lies in the shadows. Families, too, carry their own illusions of fate. How often do you see the child of an abusive parent grow up vowing never to repeat the same cruelty, yet unconsciously passing on the same wounds to their own children? The cycle feels like destiny, but it is only the shadow, unexamined and unhealed, doing its quiet work across generations. And yet there is hope in this recognition. Because if the cycle is not fate, but unconscious repetition, it can be broken. Awareness is the sword that cuts through the illusion. The moment you see the pattern, you gain the power to interrupt it. Imagine yourself standing on a path your ancestors have walked for centuries. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth by their footsteps. To walk forward without thought is to follow their same direction, to arrive at their same destination. But if you stop, if you look down and realize this is only one path among many, you gain the power to step aside, to choose differently, to carve a new way. This is the essence of Jung's insight. Fate is not a prison. It is the shadow of the unconscious until you bring it into light. Once illuminated, it loses its chains. Once faced, it becomes a teacher. Your repeated disappointments, your recurring doubts, your cycles of sorrow, they are not prophecies of failure. They are invitations, invitations to awaken, to question, to shift the story, to look at the shadow and say, I see you. I know the game you've been playing, but the game ends here. You'll imagine a gardener tending to his field. He does not simply pull weeds and walk away. If he does, the bare earth will not remain empty. Soon, new weeds will sprout, often stronger than before. Nature despises a vacuum. The only way to keep the soil alive is to plant deliberately, to cultivate carefully, to tend daily. Your mind works in exactly the same way. When you notice negative thoughts and try to remove them, you cannot leave the soil bare. If you do, the same patterns will return. The only way to transform your inner world is to plant new seeds, beliefs of strength, visions of possibility, words that remind you of who you truly are. Carl Jung knew this was not a task of one day or 1 week. It was lifelong work. The weeds of fear and shame may return, but with consistent tending, the garden changes. Neuroscience now confirms what Jung intuited. The brain is plastic. It rewires itself according to the thoughts we feed it. What you repeat grows. What you neglect withers. History, too, offers a mirror. Agricultural societies understood that survival depended not on a single harvest, but on the rhythm of patient care. Farmers in Mesopotamia, in the Nile Valley, in the rice fields of Asia, all knew the principle. The soil responds to what you give it. Carelessness breeds famine. Discipline brings abundance. So too with your inner life. If you sow only neglect, you will harvest despair. If you sow consciously, with patience and devotion, your harvest will be peace. This is why simple daily practices matter. Each morning before the noise of the world floods in, take a few minutes to plant something new. Write affirmations. Not empty cliches, but words that stir something deep inside. Phrases like, I am not my thoughts, I am the one who chooses them. Or, I deserve to heal and grow. Or even, I am capable of living with peace. These are not spells, but seeds. And like any seed, they require time, sunlight, and water. Think of great civilizations again. The strength of Rome was not built in a day, but through discipline repeated daily. Roads laid stone by stone, legions trained hour by hour. Likewise, your inner empire is built not in one dramatic act, but in daily tending. So when you next catch yourself in the grip of a thought that drains your energy, remember, you are the gardener. You may not be able to stop weeds from sprouting, but you can always choose what to water. And what you water grows. Carl Jung often spoke of archetypes, the universal characters that live in every human soul. One of these is the warrior. But this is not the warrior who conquers lands or spills blood. This is the inner warrior, the one who fights not for dominion over others, but for the survival of his own soul. The inner warrior is forged in silence, in struggle, in the moments when you feel broken, but still rise to face another day. Each time you resist surrender to the voice that tells you you are not enough, you awaken him. Each time you choose courage over despair, even in the smallest of ways, you sharpen his blade. History offers countless reflection of this inner battle. The Spartan soldier, trained from childhood, learned not merely to fight enemies with spear and shield, but to conquer fear itself. The samurai of Japan lived by Bushido, a code that demanded mastery not only of combat, but of the self. Monks in desert monasteries, far from the noise of the world, waged war not with swords, but with their own thoughts, battling pride, lust, despair, and doubt in the stillness of prayer. The forms differ, but the essence is the same: discipline, courage, and the refusal to surrender to the shadows within. Jung's warrior archetype teaches us that facing pain is not weakness, it is initiation. To step into fire without crumbling, to stand in darkness without being consumed, this is the work of the warrior soul. And make no mistake, that warrior lives inside you. You do not summon him by pretending you are invincible. You awaken him the moment you admit your fear, yet act anyway. When you stand in front of the mirror and whisper, "Today I may feel broken, but I will keep going." That declaration is a battle cry. And do you know what terrifies the shadow most? Not anger, not denial, but belief. The instant you choose to believe in yourself, even with trembling hands, the shadow loses its grip. Because the warrior has risen, and once he rises, he cannot be silenced. Carl Jung once said, "Gold is found where you least want to look." It is a truth that shocks the heart. The treasure of your life is hidden in the very place you fear to enter. The wound you refuse to touch, the memory you keep locked away, the shadow you run from, that is where your strength lies waiting. This is the work of alchemy, not in laboratories of smoke and glass, but in the furnace of the human soul. Alchemists of the Middle Ages believed they could turn lead into gold. Jung believed their writings were not about metal, but about the psyche. The lead was suffering, guilt, shame, and despair. The gold was transformation, healing, and wisdom. The fire was life itself. Look at history, and you will see this process everywhere. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist, spent years in prison camps under brutal conditions. He could have let bitterness consume him. Instead, he transformed that agony into some of the deepest explorations of the human spirit ever written. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years, could have emerged with vengeance. Instead, he turned his suffering into forgiveness, guiding a nation toward reconciliation. Even in smaller, quieter lives, the principle holds true. A mother who has known loss becomes the one who comforts others with unmatched tenderness. A soldier who has tasted fear becomes the mentor who teaches courage to the young. Pain, when faced, becomes fuel. It shapes the strongest steel. And here is the paradox Jung revealed. When you try to bury your pain, it festers in the dark, twisting into destructive thoughts that rule you. But when you dare to face it, when you hold it to the light, it begins to change form. The sorrow that once haunted you becomes the soil from which compassion grows. The rage that threatened to consume you becomes the fire that drives you to fight for justice. The shame that kept you silent becomes the voice that speaks truth for others who cannot. This is the alchemy of the soul, not the avoidance of suffering, but its transformation. To sit with your pain and ask, "What are you here to teach me? What hidden strength lies beneath this wound?" That act alone begins the work. The path is not easy. Alchemy requires heat, and transformation requires discomfort. You will be tempted to flee back into distraction, to bury the wound again. But if you resist, if you stay with it, something extraordinary happens. The very darkness that threatened to destroy you becomes the place where your evolution begins. And one day, you may look back and realize, the fire that once burned you has become the fire that forged you. Inside every human being lives a voice. Sometimes it is kind, guiding, and steady, but often it is cruel, impatient, and unforgiving. It shows up when you stumble, when you fail, when you compare yourself to others. And too often, that voice becomes the loudest authority in your life. But Jung reminds us, this voice is not the essence of who you are. It is an echo, a collage of inherited judgments, past experiences, cultural expectations, and wounded fragments. The tragedy is that most people never question it. They accept the voice of their inner critic as truth. They confuse the shadow for the self. Self-compassion is the antidote. Not indulgence, not resignation, but the radical act of refusing to be your own enemy. Think of it this way. Would you ever speak to someone you love in the same way you speak to yourself? Would you look a friend in the eyes and say, "You are worthless. You will never change"? Of course not. And yet, for years, many carry on conversations like this within their own minds. Neuroscience confirms what Jung and other mystics sensed long before. What you repeat becomes your reality. Every thought strengthens neural pathways. When the inner voice is endlessly critical, the brain reinforces patterns of shame and despair. But the opposite is also true. When you deliberately choose new words, "I am learning, I am evolving, I am worthy of healing," you begin to lay new pathways. Over time, the brain follows where the voice leads. Culture, however, does not make this easy. We live in an age of constant comparison. Social media feeds magnify flaws, society glorifies perfection, and the marketplace thrives on insecurity. Every advertisement whispers that you are not enough until you buy, achieve, or look a certain way. In such a world, reclaiming your inner dialogue is more than personal healing. It is rebellion. It is the act of saying, "I will not let the voices of culture dictate my worth. I will write my own script." History shows the power of such reclamation. Think of Frederick Douglass, who taught himself to read, though the society insisted he remain ignorant. By changing the narrative he told himself, by refusing the inner voice of oppression, he rewrote not only his life, but helped to rewrite the destiny of a nation. Think of Rosa Parks, who, when told by society she was powerless, answered with her body, her silence, her refusal. Both stood not only against external oppression, but against the inner voices of doubt designed to keep them small. So too must you. To reclaim your dialogue is to seize the pen from the shadow and write anew. It is to hear the voice that says, "I can't," and answer with, "I am learning." To hear, "I am broken," and reply, "I am becoming." To transform "I am unworthy" into "I am more than enough." It is not about lying to yourself. It is about choosing a story that allows growth instead of collapse. Because what you repeatedly whisper into your own soul will one day bloom into the life you live. True healing, Jung believed, does not come from denying the darkness, but from integrating it. The goal is not perfection, but wholeness, the recognition that every part of you, light and shadow alike, has its place in the story of your becoming. To walk this path, you must first create space. In a world of endless noise, opinions, distractions, messages clamoring for your attention, the quiet voice of the soul is drowned. Transformation requires silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of awareness. This is why practices like meditation endure across cultures. You do not need a mountain monastery. You need only a few minutes each day to close your eyes, breathe, and watch your thoughts without judgment. At first, the mind resists. The negative thoughts march in louder than ever. They demand your attention like weeds pushing through the soil. But if you remain still, If you do not fight or flee, you will notice something extraordinary. The thoughts are not you. They are clouds drifting across a vast sky. And you are the sky itself. This is the essence of Jung's teaching. Your thoughts are visitors. You decide which may stay and which must pass. You are not the prisoner of your mind. You are the master of its gates. The symbol Jung often returned to was the circle. Wholeness, unity, the soul's journey of integration. Every shadow faced, every pain transformed, every voice reclaimed becomes a piece of that circle. And with each piece, the image of your true self grows clearer. You were never meant to be flawless. You were meant to be whole. History honors those who walk this path before us. Mystics who turned silence into revelation. Warriors who learned discipline not to conquer others, but themselves. Ordinary people who broke generational cycles by daring to think differently. Each of them chose not to surrender to the narrative of their shadow, but to rewrite it. And now it is your turn. The next time a thought arises that says, "I am not enough," pause. Breathe. Answer, "I am more than this thought." When the shadow whispers, "You cannot change," respond, "I already am." Each reply is not just resistance. It is creation. It is the act of authoring a new story. Remember, you do not need everything to be perfect to begin. Chaos itself is the raw material of transformation. The fact that your life is messy, uncertain, or painful makes your choice to change even more powerful. So today, make the choice. Choose not to be a slave to your mind. Choose to face the shadow and integrate it. Choose to become the warrior who stands firm, the gardener who plants with care, the alchemist who turns wounds into wisdom. Above all, choose to remember, you are not your thoughts. You are the one who watches them, and that awareness, quiet, steady, eternal, is the key to your freedom. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a new way of living, not in denial, not in fear, but in wholeness. The journey is long, but you are not alone. Every human being who has ever awakened walked this same road, and now it is open before you. Step into it.